My name's Allie Franklin. I'm Director of Client Strategy here at Red Door. And my job here is to make sure I'm understanding what's keeping our clients up at night, understanding the questions that are tough to answer that we can help our clients to help their business. And a question that's been coming up a lot lately has been, how is AI changing the way we as marketers should be approaching our website, rethinking our marketing mix, right? And luckily, I'm here joined by Angie Stewart, our manager of SEO here at Red Door, who's going to help us answer that question and a lot of other ones today. So, hi, Angie, welcome.
Hi, yes. Absolutely, Allie. One of the things as an SEO department at Red Door is our main focus is going to be helping brands get found. So it's really important that we're, thinking about how the search space is evolving. One of the things that I hear from Allie and clients, it's kind of a hot topic these days, is AI. How is it changing the search space, not only for SEO, but for content, user experience, and a lot of things like that. So I'm really excited to talk about it today.
I am too. So 3 questions I think I had coming into this that we hope to answer for all of you today are going to be, number 1, what's changing about the search landscape? And really, why is it important that we understand how people are searching differently? What do you all need to know as marketers to help respond to this new search landscape? And then how can we all create trust as marketers to connect with our audience and just be able to have those connections as AI becomes more universally part of our day-to-day? So any of these questions stand out as who's 1, 2, or 3? I want to see show of hands. Which one are people most interested in hearing about? Let me hear. 1, 2. 2, lots of 2s.
Ooh, lots of 2s.
Lots of 2s. Okay, awesome. I love it. Okay, so before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. First, for those of you joining online, hi, we see you. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you do want to share this event with friends, it's not too late. So use the link that's in the Teams chat window, and you can share that with friends and colleagues. Today's session is meant to be interactive. We really don't want to be talking this entire time, but we've got lots of content to cover. So we have set aside time at the end for questions. For those of you online, use the chat function. We want to hear from you, so chime in with questions or thoughts that you have during the meeting. And then lastly, rest assured, we will be recording this event. So definitely be present. If you want to take notes, but we will be following up after, so you'll have a copy of the presentation. Okay, I think we can get started. So Angie, let's start off simply. How are people searching differently today?
Yes, so before it used to be Google, Bing, anybody remember Ask Jeeves? So why don't I actually pause for a second and kind of get, a poll of the audience. How do all of you find information? If you have something that you're looking for, how do you find it?
Call it out. TikTok, ChatGPT, a lot of Google, Gemini.
Amazon, yeah.
TikTok in the chat.
Yep. Yes, these are great. So what I'm hearing is that a lot of these different platforms have AI incorporated into them. So with AI into search, that makes it more adaptive and more unique to that individual search experience. But what it also does is make it more customizable, deeper. And, one of the things that's most important like that is that when you are searching, and you get those types of results, that's a really great experience that you're getting. So it's definitely shifting in a more deep and complex way.
So with this shift, marketers have for a long time now been focused on making their websites as optimized for Google. Google's been queen for a while now, right? So everything from content production, structure of your site, back-end data, that's been the focus that we've been kind of had to respond to. So should we keep doing this, or is that now shifting with these new platforms coming into play?
Yes, that's a great question. keep doing all of those things. Those are great. Think about your backends, think about all of that, that work that's going into it. That's not lost. Keep doing it. That's great. What we want to look at is that this search space is evolving. And so the tactics that you're going to be using are going to be evolving as well. So because it's moving to this kind of more customized way, you need to now think a little bit deeper on, what are the things that I'm going to be able to show that are going to make those connections. So yes, absolutely keep focusing on that. But now think about, okay, how do I evolve the strategies that I have in place?
Okay, this sounds like there's some change coming, and I think change can be scary. So what do we need to know? Like, what should we focus on?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there is a lot changing. These platforms are changing. We heard a lot of different answers for where people are asking their questions. And so across those different platforms and places that you can search, the thing or common thread, if you will, that is really showing is this kind of deeper and more customized ability to search. And I think we might go into an example that might be helpful. So again, let me poll the audience. Who here plays pickleball? Anyone? Yeah, that's great. So Allie, this one's going to be for you. So Allie wants to pick up pickleball. She is a tennis.
I love pickleball.
She loves pickleball. She loves tennis. Anything with a racket or a paddle. So she's trying to pick up tennis. So before, when she was searching for that, or pickleball, yes, trying to pick up pickleball, she would look for maybe, pickleball for beginners or pickleball rules, something like that. Now she can say, I used to be a tennis player and I'm trying to pick up pickleball. How might I remember the rules because of my tennis background? And now it went from a result that was a little bit more general to a result that's very specific to that individual, what their past experience is, where they're at in trying to understand this new thing that they're trying to do or ask a question about. And so it's a lot more specific to them and the answer that they're getting for themselves.
I love that. That content would be very helpful to me. So I love it. Okay, so pickleball aside, I don't think we have any pickleball brands present with us, but for anyone listening, we're interested. So outside of pickleball, we've got lots of other brands here. So what do our clients and our peers need to know, and how can they approach this for their own brands?
Yes, that is a great question. And before we get into that, I want to kind of talk about the why a little bit before we get into the how. That's how my brain works. So let me take you on this journey with me. So a few months ago, Google came out with this update called the Helpful Content Update. What this update does is it aims to give you a better result that is more unique to you because of the experience. So it's all about actually having genuinely helpful content that's being served to you that's going to give you the best experience. That's having, good user experience, the topic makes sense. Really what we're getting away from is kind of this idea of gaming the algorithm and more towards what is information that I could be giving to this person who is asking for information in a way that is most helpful, actually legitimately helpful to that searcher.
So Angie, I've heard you tell my clients and to us, so I've been trained that we don't update our website for Google, we update our website for the user, right? So if we're creating content and creating an experience that's good for the end user, Google's satisfied and Google is happy too. Is that still the case, or knowing there's kind of Google's not the only one in play anymore, is that still how we should think about it?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and this is kind of the idea for search that we use for Google, but you can also think about this and how it applies to a lot of these other platforms, is this idea of search intent. And that's kind of what you're talking about. So search intent is the idea that you are trying to understand, right? There's a person who is searching for something. They have a question. They have an answer that they want a result for or an answer for. And so they're trying to find it. So you're trying to understand who that person is. What are they asking? What do they mean by what they're asking? Because sometimes the words that they use aren't the same as everybody else. And what type of information is going to give them that result? So you're trying to think about, where they are in their journey, maybe how much information they have about what they're looking for, some of their past experiences. Because if you can think about it in kind of that granular level, then when you give them that information, it's going to be the most helpful for them. They're going to be like, great, they gave me that answer. Maybe I'll come back later because they were able to answer my question. That topic makes sense for me. And so if I want to come back and learn more, I can come back to that brand or website or whatever it might be.
So instead of thinking of it as a brand, what content do we feel we can create, create content for? What topics? We should be saying, what does our audience care about? What do they care about? What kind of content do they want? So it's more about the searcher, the human on the other end versus what we care about as a brand.
Yes, exactly. Making these genuine connections is going to be so important in the future. Really understanding who your audience is and making that genuine connection is so important. So, we use things in SEO like keywords when trying to understand a topic, including it on your page or something like that. But what we're kind of evolving to is sort of this idea that it's a lot deeper in terms of kind of that like customization. And how you do that is you understand what that audience is. Around the information, you need to have, a deeper understanding of what their need is, what their desires are, what their interests are. So when you layer that into the information that you're developing, that's what's going to really start to capture their attention and ultimately is going to lead them to interact with you a lot more. I mean, if you think about it, if somebody is getting the information where it's actually genuinely helpful, it makes sense for the brand, then that person is going to stay longer. They're going to interact with you more. It's going to cause more traffic. They're going to be a better customer. Maybe they tell their friends. And I mean, ultimately, if we're getting down to it, like that's what's going to help your bottom line.
It sounds like we're talking about genuine connections. It sounds like it's a lot just like IRL, real life, building genuine connections, what we need to do with people in our lives and the relationships. We need to understand their desires, their emotions, what they care about so that we can position ourselves as better partners, allies, friends, right, to all of them. So it feels very personal. It's a very kind of personal approach. What role does content play in, how do we use, knowing that's so personal, how do we make a piece of content that is creating this kind of genuine connection?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're creating that content, it's going to be really important to, really think about the kind of place that they are, what they're asking and being able to give that result, understanding sort of that genuine need. So there's 3 things that you can think about when doing that. So first is going to be really truly understanding your audience. And when you're truly understanding your audience, you can create tailored content to meet that need. So what does that look like? So at Red Door, we do something like a content gap analysis where we're kind of understanding topic clusters around, what that is. There might be, if we're staying on the pickleball example, there might be a topic of cluster, or there might be something that emerges about, tennis players who are getting into pickleball, something like that. And so you can start to tailor and create your content around there. And, when you're thinking about what that information is, it's also really important to deliver it in a way that is going to connect with them. So maybe that's text, maybe that's video, maybe that's images, infographics, right? There's a lot of different sort of multimedia things that you could be doing to be connecting with your audience, depending on what that topic is and how that person is going to be receiving that information the best.
It sounds like even before we get content involved, we all need to ask some tough questions on, do we really know our audience? Do we know what they care about? Do we know what topics are top of mind for them? And I think probably for a lot of people, that might be a tough question. We might have to hit some real realities there and maybe do a little bit more research and maybe, dig in so that you can kind of go through that process in the most informed position.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, that takes time, right? That takes a lot of digging. You say you want to produce a really thoughtful piece of content, like there's a lot of work that goes into it. That's definitely something that's real. And, when we think about, we talked a lot about making that genuine connection and understanding that person. The next kind of place you go is, where does that happen? And that's kind of where we transition into sort of the second thing is when you're sharing that, do your research, trying to understand who that person is, share real stories when you're talking about that topic. So maybe that's coming from a customer, a really loyal customer that you're able to get testimonials from, who can then share about it. Maybe that's somebody who is really experienced in that area. They're an expert player in pickleball, they're a professional, and they are able to advocate for your brand or whatever it is. That's going to be really trusting for somebody who sees that, because, I think the thing that the Huberman podcast taught all of us is that we love hearing about experts from experts. We find that trust, we love hearing about the science of it. And so that's going to be really important, when you're sharing things like that, because it's going to help resonate with your audience, depending on, who's talking about it.
So if you know someone, again, not to belabor the pickleball topic, but if we know someone is interested in pickleball for social purposes, right? I think there's a lot of reasons people get into pickleball, some for exercise, some for just fun and social. So if we know that that's what our audience really cares about, maybe it's following a friend group around locally and capturing some great content, getting some interviews with them, having them, maybe wear your gear if you're a pickleball equipment company, something like that. So you're kind of showing that you understand the audience and you're visually featuring them on your website so that your audience starts to see themselves in the content you create.
Yeah, that's so smart. One of the things I heard you say is social media. Use the other channels and platforms that you have available where people are willingly giving you their information to help understand who that person is. So yes, it's about, of course, doing things like keyword research, understanding kind of that search intent and where they're coming from, but go to other channels. The people who are asking these questions are also on those platforms and also have the same needs and interests and desires. And so they're translating it from that platform to this platform. And that's kind of that whole fun ecosystem that we get to play on. So when you're on social, what are they talking about? What are they interested? What are they sharing? We use different types of tools to understand that as well. Things like social listening, which is kind of gauging the sort of interest or topics that might be around social media. You can see what's performing well for email. You can see what's performing well for your paid search program. Really tap into some of those other different channels where you can gain an insight into what they're interested in and then leverage people from those. So maybe there's somebody on social that's liking everything and sharing everything and it's like, oh my gosh, I love your brand. Use them because they're also going to be excited that they get to share about it. They're going to become more loyal, talk about it, perpetuate the word of your brand.
Word of mouth. That's really what we're all working toward, right?
Exactly.
Getting it off the platforms, getting it off digital sometimes, and just talking about it with friends.
Yeah, exactly. So, like I said, do your research, use your full ecosystem, and things like that is going to be really helpful. And then finally, you just did so much work. You went on your platforms, you did your research, all of that. You got a lot of information. Don't make it hard for them. Don't make it hard, make it easy. So that can look like a fast website. If you land on your website and it's slow, that's a friction point that might cause somebody to leave. So we'll do things like, page speed audits where we're understanding, are the critical pages fast? Where do we need to be making improvements? Things like that. You also want to make sure other elements of your site are really technically sound. So everything, is loading properly. Everything's firing properly. Nothing's getting stuck, timed out, things like that. Again, reducing those friction points. Another piece of this is going to be organization. So how are things organized on your site? So that you can think of that structurally. So if you're landing on the site, what does your navigation look like? What are the links that are included in there? Is it easy to find the most impactful information in, less than 3 to 5 clicks from when you're on, your main website? How deep does that person have to go? Let's say they came in from another way, social, email, search, and they land on your page. Can they continue? Is there a place where they can click on a link to something else that's interesting? Is the navigation easy where they might be able to answer another question? Are there, helpful, fun things at the bottom, like showing social where they can interact with the brand more? Are there links to other similar pages? So there's a lot of other ways that you can kind of help someone snake their way through your website to help keep them engaged. So all in all, make sure that it's easy for them to find that information organizationally. And honestly, this even goes to labeling. So think about what you're calling that information. So being really strategic, and even in your navigation, how are you labeling what those different sections are? What are you giving titles and headers to? What are you including in the links so that somebody knows where they're going when they have the idea that they want to go to the next place? It's an easy decision. It's as little friction as possible, and they've continued on, because this online world is fast. No one wants to get stuck. They say our attention spans are shrinking, so keep them moving.
So we should probably keep it moving. That's a great cue. When we lay these out like this, it seems obvious, it seems simple, but I want to see show of hands who feels like they're doing one of these things well for their brands or for their companies or their clients. Okay, a few. How about 2? Keep them up if you think you're doing 2 well. Not a lot of hands. Okay, I'm not going to ask 3. So it seems like we all have an opportunity maybe to revisit some of these and maybe start from the beginning to make sure that we're kind of going about this in the best process. That's great. So I think we talk about these genuine connections. This is really the path to get there, right? But that sounds a little labor intensive, right? You just said we did all of this hard work to understand our audience, create these great stories and experiences and content, and then making it really easy to find, which is easier said than done, right? So how can we, to continue to stay on this genuine connection, how can we lean on AI to help with content production?
Yes, absolutely. So the great thing about AI, especially generative AI, so creating content, is that one, it's easily accessible. So there's lots of free versions of tools. There's lots of low cost paid for ways of tools. And when we talk about the ease of use, like it is relatively easy to use. You're not having to code anything. You can kind of go in there and start asking your questions. So there's a lot that can come up, and honestly, there's a lot of tools, right? Everybody's kind of trying to get a piece of this AI pie. I heard, ChatGPT, there's things like Jasper AI that you can be using. So there's a lot of different tools that are available, but I would use them as a tool. We use them a lot as a tool, kind of as a starting place. So you can use it for things like ideation. So maybe you just did all of that research where you are understanding who your consumer is. You have a lot of research. Maybe you found something, on social, and so you want to expand on that, but you don't know quite where to start. That's where that ideation can come in, where you can use it to expand on either giving you new ideas or expand on an idea that you already have, really maximizing kind of that existing idea. You can also use it for things like, outlines or places to start, structures, things like that. So it can give you an idea of how something might be laid out. You could be working, and this is really using it within your workflow. Before, you kind of had to sit and have that ideation yourself, but now you're almost brainstorming with AI versus another person, and so then you can kind of use that within your workflow to advance, what your ideas are, things like that.
I hear all the time my clients say that content production is one of the biggest drain on resources, and that a lot of times our teams at Red Door are coming to our clients saying, here's the opportunity. Maybe we have really understood our audience and we know what they want and we know what content they're looking for. But then you're like, I don't have anyone to help put pen to paper. We only have a limited amount of people on our team, right? So, I mean, that's a reality that we have to face. And I think, I mean, it's interesting to hear. We've heard a lot in the news about how AI, how people feel comfortable using AI, right? And you talked about using it for ideation and for outlines, right? But I think it's an interesting approach to say, okay, in that full process of from ideation all the way through execution, where can we speed this process up so that you guys are spending less time on certain areas and dedicating those resources that you have to others, right? So I know that, at Red Door, we do use it mostly for kind of the ideation and structure. And then we do kind of rely on the human element a little bit more for some of the writing and the execution and the design work as well. Okay, so one more question. So using AI, we all know what it's like to read a piece of content that obviously was written by a robot, right? We've all been there before. We're entering that world and you're like, this was obviously used by this was obviously a ChatGPT response, right? So I love that it can help us expedite and move across and help, with content production. But how do we really make sure that you're using AI in the best way to get the best result?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you bring up a really good point. There's, now that we're seeing a lot of AI results, we're almost starting to be able to pick up on what that looks like. I'm not sure if all of you are familiar, but, there was, I think a couple months ago, when Gen AI came out, there's like this wave of all of these travel books because everybody's going to Italy these days, and how, what travel book I want to use. But all of the travel books were wrong, misguiding, not quality. And so what that's really teaching us is that, yes, AI is fantastic, but it is a starting place. And you have to use that for that ideation, but really to learn how to use it as that tool, like I was saying, and then it can give you a better result. So there's kind of 3 things that we like to think about.
I got to say, being lost in Italy doesn't sound like the worst problem, though. So I don't feel bad for them that much.
Maybe it was actually an experience, and then they're like, here's this QR code and take your pictures. Yeah, that can be our next idea. So the 3 things to kind of think about is 1, if you are going to use one of these tools, and I heard ChatGPT a lot, I feel like that's kind of very buzzy these days. So let's use that as an example. So for ChatGPT, you can use something called custom GPTs if you have the paid for version. So essentially, that is a bot that you could be using. In that, train your bot. Give it the information to help output information that's going to be really good for you. So what does that look like? It's giving it your brand guidelines. It's giving it past examples. It's giving it, do's, don'ts, things that you want to take into consideration when it's actually giving you the answer when you're asking it and prompting it to. So it's kind of giving sort of that background information that's so important, the context. So it's pulling from a lot of different areas within the web. So if you can kind of help guide it in a certain direction with a criteria, then it's going to help give you sort of that stay within those guidelines that you're creating. And of course, you can iterate from there. The next is going to be strategic. So it says prompt engineering is the fancy way of saying it, but really it's just asking a good question and giving the context and what you want when you're asking that question. So for example, I mean we're gonna stay on pickleball, folks. So if you're asking about pickleball, say, and you want to write a listicle for it. Here's the 5 things that you need to know if you're a tennis player and you want to pick up the rules. Tell it it's a listicle. Say how many words you want it to have there. Tell it the reading level that you're looking for. Tell it in the tone that you're looking for. My audience, this is friendly and energetic. Make sure that you're staying in, you're using the Oxford comma. There's a lot of different things that you could be including in there as your prompt engineering so that's actually when you are asking the question, inputting it, and then hitting enter. So that's kind of what that looks like. And then finally is this sort of element of the human touch. So again, you just did a lot of work to set up your bot, ask the right question, and get it in a final output. But it's going to be really important to have that sort of human QA element when you're getting that information. So we've been talking about human connection a lot here. Humans know what humans want. And you also did that research to understand your audience. And so when you're reading and reviewing it, does this sound like my brand voice? Does this sound like AI wrote it? Or does this sound like a person wrote it? Is it actually hitting on the interests and the things that I was looking for it to hit on? Is it structured correctly? If I'm reading this, is there a clear topic organization down the page, or is it kind of jumping everywhere because that's sort of the result that it was getting? So there's a lot of different things you can be thinking about in that human touch element.
It seems like the human touch, you almost need to go back to the beginning of what we talked about, of asking yourself, is this showing that I truly understand my audience? It's kind of like challenging yourself to kind of put that to the test as you're evaluating and reading and reviewing the content. So that's great. This was super helpful. I think, Angie, if there's 3 things that I took from today, I think there was a lot of information. And I think as we start to take some of this back with us, if I'm capturing this correctly, I think what I'm making sure is really ask yourself, are we understanding and truly know our audience, right? And using as many tools as you can to get as deep as possible. I think sometimes we want those target audiences to be broad enough, but I think there's value in understanding depth to help with the level of genuine connections we're trying to make. You can't make a genuine connection off of a broad stroke audience profile, right? Next is that things are changing and we need to adapt, right? I think change can be hard, but I definitely think that approaching it in this way of saying, okay, we're not just optimizing our site for Google anymore. It's a bigger effort, and it's a bigger game we're now all playing in. So I think that's just as important. And then these connections, again, I think I'm going to bring this back of, it's kind of, again, I keep going back to that personal element of how do we create these connections in our own life, and how do we do the same on our websites and in the content that we produce and put out there, which is great. And then I'd say the last piece is just always adding that human touch. Hopefully no one in this room is replaceable in terms of the value that you're adding to your brand, while we can train the bots and make them as hardworking as possible. I think having that human touch is just as important to make sure that we have that final QA and that final gut check on how much we're delivering to our audience. So super helpful. So that wraps up the key points I think that we really wanted to cover today. But we really want to hear from you. I think we covered, hopefully we answered some of those questions in the beginning. If we didn't, I want to hear from you guys. And what other questions can we answer for you today? So as a reminder for those in the chat, if you have questions, please add them in. We'll read those out loud. And if you are present and have a question, we'll pass the mic to you.
Testing. All right, so what about using AI kind of like strategically to find keywords and to talk about, like, I think you were talking about this earlier, like find the keyword clusters and maybe find gaps within like what there is on competitors like content online? Could it be trusted for that, or could that just kind of run back into the same robotic structure?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so that kind of goes back to that ideation piece that I was talking about. So the question was, if you want to use AI for keyword research, that's going to be a great way to get inspiration on what you're looking for. So let's say, you want to create an article about a certain topic and you give it the prompt of, give me some ideas for keywords. That's going to be a great way to get those ideas, but you want to take that list and then look at it even further and see, is that actually, going back to what I was mentioning about search intent. So when you're looking at that term, what do they mean when they're trying to ask it? What's the question that they have? And then is what you're writing the answer to that question? So it's great for topic ideation, but still going kind of a step further to sort of do a check on the information that it's giving you is going to be sort of the best way that you can get the result. You can keep going, of course, and ask for like even more types of keywords off of that sort of seed list, but it's going to be important to keep checking and making sure that it's meeting that search intent.
There's a great question in the chat from Erica, and it's actually, this is a reverse question. So this is a question for the audience, not for the panelists. But midway through the deck, we asked the question, or Ali asked the question and polled the audience of how many of us were deploying all three of those strategies. So understanding our audiences, sharing real stories, and making content that's easy to find and access. Not all of us raised our hands for 2 and 3 of those criteria. So the question for everyone here is, what is the biggest barrier to executing on all 3 of those? Is there a particular pain point that is blocking us from that as marketers? I heard politics.
Yeah, this is Madeline. I'm a senior business manager at Red Door, and one of the things that we often run into is time and being able to prioritize, what is the most important thing and what area should we focus on first, and then developing the appropriate timeline based on that prioritization. So I think eventually the dream is that we'll get there, but until then, we really have to prioritize. So I have a follow-up question to that. What is the priority of those 3 things? Where are the areas that we should focus on first?
Oh, for me. I thought that was another audience question. So 3 areas to prioritize first in terms of these ones. I would say step 1 is honestly the same. It really builds off of one another, is making that genuine connection. Because if what you're talking about or the message that you're trying to send isn't connecting with the right person or the right customer for your brand, then it's not going to be as effective, and that's not going to work as hard as it could. So if you're really understanding who your audience is, then you're going to be able to, not only modify, honestly, your information, but your products, right? There's a lot of things that kind of go along with that. So understanding who you're talking to, who's the most qualified for that is going to be the most important.
To kind of build off that, and this is also in the chat, are there any pitfalls when it comes to building that engaging content? Can a brand maybe go too far in one direction? Because I'm guessing there's a balancing act to it of still being general enough with your content and not getting too prescriptive or too narrow. So have we run into that at all?
Yes, that's a great question. So when it comes to the type of information that you're putting out there, use data as your friend to answer that question for you. So if you did put out a piece of information that maybe didn't get a lot of engagement, ask why. If you did get a lot of engagement, again, same thing, ask why. What was so great about that? What did they like about that we can then iterate on further? Why did something maybe not get a lot of engagement? And do your research and take those learnings and apply it to the next time. Being strategic about what worked in the past and what is working for you, and then moving in that direction strategically.
I think not to give an example of, I think, an area where we've done this, which is it'll give everyone a chuckle, is for one of our clients, Children's Hospital of Orange County. Our team had identified that a major topic of interest amongst parents is their children's poop. And we identified this using data, that there was lots of search and lots of interest in this area to understand what their children's poop means in different shades. So that feels very niche and very specific, and yet identifying that opportunity amongst our audience, creating that content that was optimized for these searches and this interest with our audience, the page has seen exponential traffic because of identifying that and really optimizing it towards what people are searching for. So I think sometimes it really does pay off, because that level of specificity is what people are looking for.
I would love to see that social campaign.
Obviously, with Google incorporating the generative AI in, when you ask it a question, it can produce a sort of a quick answer for you right at the top of the page. And for someone like, I'll take my mother, for example, who loves to research on topics before she makes a decision doing anything, how do brands combat that their content that might have addressed that question on their page is now kind of populated above the fray, and that they won't get the eyes on it like before?
Yep, totally. And your mother is like my mother, so they should hang out. Okay. So what you're talking about is, so when you're searching for something on Google, there's a page that shows for you. That's called the search engine result page, or the SERP. So what you're talking about is the result that's showing, especially there's a new type of result that's coming up, that's kind of take up the space at the top, kind of moving everything a little bit lower. And I would first kind of reframe, rather than combating, but adapting to what that new result is, because there's going to be change again and again, and we just need to be able to adapt to whatever that result is. So it's then kind of re-understanding, when somebody's looking for that particular type of term, how can I get myself into that result? And that's kind of where it ties back to, again, making that genuine connection, understanding kind of those deeper needs and wants of somebody, that's going to make it, to Allie's point earlier, even more niche to be able to show within those results. There might be, because that result is moving down, there might be a change in interactions with what your results were before, but it's kind of then adapting to whatever that new normal is, and then trying to either show in that result, or lean on other elements like in that marketing mix where it makes the most sense to make those connections to be able to show in that result.
All right, so building on that, we used to try and rank first in search, and part of that strategy of being elsewhere on the web was through backlinks, so that other sites would kind of validate your relevance. With Google now providing the answer at the top, how does that change like a backlinking strategy, or is there something we should be thinking about similarly, given that Google's getting that answer not just from our site but from everywhere else? How do we think about content distribution?
Yep, that's a great question. And so we're talking about backlinking, we're talking about backlinking strategies. Again, let's pivot the mindset to what is going to be most helpful for the person. What is the result that I can give them that's going to make that connection? So before, maybe it used to, again, be building backlinks, which was kind of that like vote of trust, which of course is going to be important foundationally, but there's other elements of trust that are going to factor into that. So like I mentioned, is there somebody that can advocate for that information that was a current customer, or maybe an expert in the field that can show that type of trust. So yes, getting mentions on other websites is going to be really great, not just for backlinks, but because that's another set of eyes that they can that you can get in front of, which is going to be really great. But it's also thinking about, where are the other areas that I could leverage that idea of like expertise outside of just backlinks.
So where is it pulling the data from? Is it pulling the AI? Is it pulling it from schema? Is it pulling it from, is there an algorithm that it includes specific things so that it actually delivers us in that AI search result?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the question is with this new type of result, how are you getting pulled in? There are some tools. So taking a step back for a second. So that type of result that you're talking about is SGE, which is the search generated experience. That's not 100% out right now. It's still rolling out. Gemini is new. There's a lot of new things that are coming about. There are some tools that have been able to crawl or access what those results are. But because this is so new, there's still a lot of tools that kind of have to catch up to that. And because it's not 100% out, the tools also are not 100% out and being able to give us that data yet. So once, there's a full launch of SGE, then we're going to be able to get that information. But because it's not quite out, the tools haven't quite caught up with it yet.
So what should we be doing now?
Yes. So again, it goes back to that unique content. If Google tells you something, listen, because they don't tell you things a lot. And so when they talk about the helpful content update, that's kind of my indication to say, okay, let's reevaluate the information that's on my website and make sure that, you are having it be the most helpful possible and making that most connection. And it would just intrinsically be the right type of result for your customer to show up. Yeah, it's again, like, there's lots of different things and tactics you can be doing, but kind of less about like and more the result that you're giving to somebody. And then it would just naturally, result in that best kind of experience.
Hi, I'm Elena. I'm the digital analytics intern. And with all these new platforms that are coming out, do you think that big companies such as Bing, Microsoft, and Google are finding ways to identify people who are using AI and kind of push them away from being at the top of a browser when you search it, because they're able to identify who's using AI and when there's not a real, genuine human touch? And what are ways that we can combat that?
I would love to be in big tech's brain. If I could be in big tech's brain, that'd be awesome. So it's kind of hard to speak for what those companies are going to be doing, but as a marketer, what you could be doing is thinking about the new mix that you have. So if there's new tools out there, how is somebody interacting with those tools within the mix that already exists? How much time are they spending on those tools versus another? How does that interaction influence, when they're searching in ChatGPT versus going to social, but then going on to Google, then going on to TikTok? And really kind of that common thread that I can think of is, what that interest is. What are they looking for? What inspires them, desires them, what's their need? And in that different mix, how do I make sure that I'm giving them that answer?
It sounds like, I'm sure eventually we're going to start being dinged. I know we're not, totally just working on algorithms, but we're going to start being dinged if the content doesn't feel like it was written by a person, right? So I think that human touch element is more important than ever to make sure that what you're putting out there is actually the way someone would want to read it and would want to talk.
This is another question from the chat, and obviously we've used the word tool a lot, and marketers love their toys. You mentioned, Angie, that a lot of the tools aren't fully baked yet, or they're evolving. But what are some of the go-to tools in your mind that are sort of must-haves for content development and SEO right now? And I know you mentioned ChatGPT, that's the obvious one, but I think you also mentioned Resonate, talked about social listening. Can you share some of those tools just for your favorites?
Yeah, absolutely. I might give you the Resonate one.
Yeah, so Resonate is a great platform tool that we use here at Red Door to really understand our audiences. So again, going back to that first question of how much do you know about your audience, the beauty of Resonate is you can input the information that you think you know at a very basic level about your audience, basic behavioral habits, or I mean, it can go as simple as demographics and location, things like that. And it expands upon that and essentially gives you much more data points to help with this kind of built out profile. So things like their media consumption habits, more about their psychological drivers, things like that. So we use this tool a lot for, I mean, everything from content production to customer journeys to media campaigns and targeting, because it essentially allows us to say, okay, if we know this about someone, what else are they interested in? What else does this kind of bigger group, where do they spend their time, so that we can then respond to that with our marketing?
Yep. Can you repeat the question one more time? I want to make sure.
Yeah, what tools are we using right now to kind of aid in this whole process?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like I said, I mentioned kind of like our process on ChatGPT. We used to use Jasper AI to also help develop content. We've moved away from that, but I think it's still like a really good tool to check out. And then for things like keyword research, we're using Bright Edge, SEMrush, Ahrefs. Those are all going to be really, really great tools for SEO.
Okay, so this is when you guys came to we had our QBR, and you were talking about how AI is pulling, I can't remember, maybe 3 years back, like it's, if that's accurate about that time. And so what is your hypothesis or intel in terms of like when that's going to be more real time, like updates, so that when you ask a question or it's pulling that, like, so it's going to show like more real time results as opposed to like pulling more historical records that have been validated and proven?
Within Google or within the?
Like I believe we were talking about like ChatGPT and like all of the different AI tools that are out there, that it kind of is more a few years back and not as current. So I would imagine that's not always going to be the case, and it's going to be more real time. So when is that tipping point, do you feel like going to happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. For something that's not Google, like a ChatGPT, it's hard to say. I mean, I would imagine it's a race to the top, like as fast as they can. For Google, one of the elements within Google is a real-time result. So let's say you're searching for like news or something like that. That's why like the news pops up so quickly. So I would imagine, because it's kind of baked into it, that they're trying to get to that point like as fast as they can. But it's kind of this balance of having a valid result that's real and right based on the search. So I think they themselves are probably trying to battle how fast that is. Oh yeah, Ron, please weigh in.
Oh, mine was a quick question on that Resonate tool that you were talking about. What drives the backend data to create those personas?
We can follow up with more specifics, because I feel like that's always the question, is specifics, but it's essentially looking at public information that's available about our audience. So as always with these tools, there's always going to be an element of what's gated and what's
available.
available, right?
Yeah.
But I think that there's a level of confidence that's associated with the platform. So depending on the size of the audience that we're able to pull the information for, it gives you a confidence measure of we're starting to get to a really small, population size. Maybe take this a little bit lighter, things like that. But I would say using it, we've seen pretty accurate. A lot of times we use it to kind of validate what we're seeing in media and some of our campaign targeting, and it's usually been pretty accurate or directional, right? I think as with any tool, using it directionally is the way to go, but it can be a really helpful starting point.
Okay, awesome.
Knowing that brands need to be optimizing their content for other platforms outside of Google, how do you make those decisions from like a prioritization and efficiency standpoint? Is it really about understanding the audience?
So when you say platforms other than Google, do you mean like
TikTok, Reddit, ChatGPT?
Yeah. For that, I would kind of take a look at, your business and what's going to make sense for your audience and where they're connecting with that type of information. So when you're thinking about the information that you are creating, where is that going to make an impact? And then be efficient with yourself. So if you have an idea of what that is, how is that going to translate to the web, to TikTok, to any of those other platforms, kind of being able to reuse that idea so you can spread it out on those different platforms, but then kind of take a look at the data that you have available and see where your customer might be engaging.
Okay, we're just that time. That wraps us up for today. And I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that joined us here in person and everyone that joined us remotely. We love having everyone join and in person and remotely. So it's so great to get this community together and have such thoughtful conversation. Thank you for everyone who had such great questions. As a reminder, we will be emailing out a recording of this presentation. And if you have any questions coming out of this, please feel free to reach out to one of us here at Red Door. If you don't have a contact yet, please see us after. We'd love to chat. And yeah, one more thing. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
The last thing I will say, and I'm thinking of you, Nate, because this just popped into my head. And Angie, you talked about bringing us along for the ride throughout your thought process. Red Door loves bringing clients along for the ride. We love trainings, we love sharing, and we had a really, really cool prompt engineering training that is awesome that Ron led up. So if you're interested in any sort of training for your content, for anything like that, then reach out to your business manager because it's exceptional, it's fun, and we love taking clients along with that.
Awesome. Thanks, Madeline. Great. Well, thank you guys again. I hope everyone has a wonderful morning and afternoon, and we'll see you guys soon.